max cut. Bob pulled in over a period of time all kinds of people to put what they could offer on those tapes. And the list is about that long, if you look at the album cover. I was absolutely flattered to be asked to play on the record. At that time, for me, to be asked to play on a Bob Dylan record was the pinnacle. That was like, you know, touchdown. You know, and I was flattered that they would fly me out here to Nashville and let me put what I could offer on that record. And I did.
Despite the good intentions of the musicians, Self-Portrait was roundly condemned as a disaster. Seemingly rushed and featuring poor choices from the Isle of Wight set, it was famously greeted by Rolling Stone journalist Greil Marcus with the words, "What is this shit?"
The interesting thing about Self-Portrait is that it was almost as if he deliberately set out to make an album that everybody would hate. It's as if he was so fed up with being the Messiah and wanting to shed this weight, this burden that placed upon him, that he set out to make a record that people would find it very hard to love.
Well, I think Self-Portrait's great on CD. I think it's the great Bob Dylan album. You can skip all the dodgy stuff, and yes, there is some dodgy stuff. When it came out, I mean, it was, you know, every album by a major rock star was an event, and an album by Dylan was like, it was like it was like one of the commandments, you know, hewn in stone. It was carried down from the mountain, and you know, you reverentially received this, and you placed the needle, and what wisdom would come from the Messiah this time, and you got, you know, all the Tired Horses and Everly Brothers songs. I mean, actually, even at the time, I quite liked it.
I mean, today it is quite customary for big artists to put out a covers album. It's a kind of holding water thing. At the time, everything Dylan put out was expected to be a major statement. He wasn't allowed to step back from the plate. But I think if Self-Portrait was released today and it was marketed as, you know, Dylan pays tribute to the great American songbook, the kind of music that he grew up on and loved, you'd get a quite different reaction to it, and it would slot very neatly into that whole Americana kind of paying tribute to our roots movement. Back then, of course, it wasn't seen like that at all. Here was the man who had changed the world, you know, covering other people's songs and coming out with banalities and platitudes.
Dylan was quick to hit back, however. The week before the release of Self-Portrait, he had again been in the studio recording both cover versions and original material. In a short number of days, he and a select cast of musicians, including Al Cooper and Ron Cornelius, recorded dozens of songs at breakneck pace.
He told me, he said, look, I've always got about 400 songs flipping around in my head. Doesn't mean that they're all finished, but I've always got an arsenal floating around in my head. And it wasn't like these are the songs. You learned what songs that he was going to do in those sessions by him announcing it after you cut the one before. And he'd just play them off with his guitar, and we would chart them. And he'd say, has everybody got what they need? Here we go, red light us. And bam, here we would go. Spontaneous, go for what you know right here on the spot. And he would play these things off. Once we got our charts ready, he'd say, you ready? And he'd go. If anybody fell off bad enough to have to do it again, if we had a train wreck and crashed, he'd say, let's do it again. However, at that time, he might count the thing off in a whole different time signature to try to keep us on the edge of our chair. I'm sure that's what he was doing. And it worked. Because if it fell apart that time and he did it the third time, we stabbed it. Either that, or if it crashed that time, he'd say next song and go on to the next song. It wasn't like he was in any lurch for material, put it that way.
His first time working with Dylan in the same room, Cornelius found that the singer was relaxed and calm, and despite stories of his aversion to the studio experience, seemed to be enjoying himself.
When he got out there in the studio, got the guitar on, started doing his thing, I think he had a lot of fun, because over the period of that time, it was kind of like we had this little team, and we of course we'd split out on the town at night and go to the hotel and sleep and come back the next day, but we all couldn't wait to get back in there doing it. You know, it was, and he seemed to be having a really good time being like a part of that thing, which I think is one big reason of why good records get made. You know, you got a bunch of great players in a room with somebody that thinks they're 10 times bigger than you are. It's like that leaks out in the room, and you just go ahead and play your parts and go home. But when you got somebody in there that's having a great time, I don't care if it's a star or if it's somebody just starting out with their career. If they're having a ball and you feel like they're having a great time, you want to play better. It makes everybody want to do it better.
The album that resulted from these sessions, New Morning, was rush-released within 4 months of Self-Portrait. The fierce criticisms were silenced, and although the album wasn't deemed vintage Dylan, it marked a significant return to form.
It's a good Bob Dylan album rather than a great Bob Dylan album, but context is all in these matters, and coming literally months after Self-Portrait, and given the title that it was given, which must have been a quite deliberate thing to suggest that this was some kind of new dawn, it was always going to receive probably greater acclaim than it deserved. People were just glad to have him back writing songs. You know, Self-Portrait is virtually all covers. Had the great songwriter actually dried up? Well, New Morning showed that he hadn't.
1970 also saw the publication of Tarantula, the book Dylan had written back in the heady days of the mid-60s, while he was still very much on the roller coaster that would eventually throw him off. Although several bootleg copies had been circulated, the official publication of the book let the fans muse over the inner workings of a now very different man.
Tarantula, although it predates Like a Rolling Stone, it's really almost all of it is written in the period between Bring It All Back Home and Highway 61. It's the same idea that he can just speed write and that the results will be blindingly creative. Dylan, needless to say, only believed that as long as he kept taking speed. Like all people who take speed, it reads brilliantly whilst you're taking speed, you know. If everybody took speed, Lester Bangs would be the most successful author in the world. But, of course, when you actually sit and read it, as just like watching Eat the Document, I'm sure Dylan, the same thing happened with Tarantula. And in fact, we know that the week after the motorcycle accident, the editor got the phone call from Dylan, I don't want to put it out, I'm going to do another book. And I'm sure it's exactly the same thing. He kind of came round, opened it up and went, what the? You know, and, you know, there's wonderful stuff in there. I mean, the Butter Sculptor's letter is one of the funniest things Dylan's ever written, but it's all very self-referential. Like a lot of his filmmaking, it just, you have to be a Dylan fan to enjoy it. And that isn't what Dylan's best work is about. It shouldn't be what it's about. You should be able to sit and enjoy it anyway.
In 1971, Dylan encountered perhaps the most disturbing character in his story, A.J. Webberman. An obsessive, educated fan, Webberman was consumed by the desire to decode Dylan's lyrics and to unlock the secret of their meaning. Coupled with the belief that Dylan was a heroin addict, this led him to repeatedly search the contents of the artist's trash cans, a process he later termed garbology.
What I was looking for was a Rosetta Stone. You know, I was looking for some kind of notes that Dylan would have put together where he gave me some hint as to what his hieroglyphics were about. You know, like first drafts of his work, you know, where I could see where he changes certain things around and he uses a less ambiguous word initially for something that's more ambiguous. But all I found was, you know, dirty diapers and incomplete letters to Johnny Cash, you know, letters from his mother and stuff about his dog Sasha, you know. But what I did by doing that was found